Hello, everyone. I am Lauren Van Hemert, and I am with Tim Dolan, who has run to join us
Literally, quite
from
literally.
the subway. But I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad we're going to get a chance to chat. Tim is with Broadway Up Close Tours. If you've taken one of his tours, you know how fabulous and rich in history they are, and we're going to talk about Broadway and Broadway being back for the 19th time in the last 3 months. and all of the things. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat. Aaron Sullivan. Oh, Aaron told me to tell you hi when we were in New York, and then I forgot. So Aaron says hello, and
Hi,
she's here with us
Dolan,
following on Facebook.
the superstar that she is. She's
um,
doing Young Frankenstein, I think, based on social media. I think. Congratulations,
Based
Aaron.
on social media, you are correct. That's not a fictional fact or whatever. That's not alternative facts. That's true.
That's
And
true.
she is killing it in it. It's a fun production. So I hope everyone will see it. And
I love that.
you'll have to come. You'll have to come and do some Raleigh theater at some point.
Okay.
Too.
It's been a long time since I've been to North Carolina, but soon enough, I'm sure. It's only a matter of time before I'm back there.
Yeah, it's meant to be. But anyway, let's talk about all the things I really want to talk about. I posted a photo of you. I reposted a photo of you in front of the big phantom mask in Times Square, and this past weekend was another one of those big marketing pushes that Broadway is back because film was reopening. But for you, literally being centered in the middle of Times Square next to the TKTS booth, for you, at what point did you kind of sense that Broadway was back?
It happens in fits and starts. You know, there's like these little things that I'd forgotten that I missed. So I see an understudy slip on the sidewalk for Wicked. So and so's on for Glinda. I saw that the other day and I thought, oh, I haven't seen that in 18 months. Or we haven't seen people with their playbills coming by our gift shop in a long time. So that's been, oh yeah, that's right. At certain times of day, people flood past with playbills because they've just seen shows. So it's these little things. It's running into people in Schubert Alley on the way to their show, on the way to an audition. It's those little connections. And so they've all kind of added up little by little. The first moment where I really felt everything going back, I think, was September 2nd when Hadestown and Waitress reopened. And so those were our first two big shows. You know, Passover had been open, Springsteen had been open. There was these New York pop-up events that had been opened. But those two musicals draw in, I think, a different crowd than those other two shows. And they're big musicals, one of which won the Tony right before the shutdown. And so, or in 2019. So that was the first moment where I was like, oh, good, it's all going to come back. And then it's kind of been this rolling shuffle of, you know, week by week, things reopen. Phantom reopening was a big one. September 14th, when those big shows reopened, that was a big one. And so it's just kind of been this little snowball that started off as a little tiny snowball that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And there's these little signs that it's all returning little by little, day by day, week by week. And it's fun. It's fun to be in the center of the swirl of it all.
It's exciting. It's an exciting place to be, but I will say, um, I was there a couple weeks ago. It feels different than pre-COVID to me. Aside from the fact that everybody's wearing masks and you have to
Sure.
show your vaccine card everywhere you go, um, the vibe until so I was there the week before Comic-Con, the week
Mm-hmm.
of Broadway Flea,
Sure. Which
and
was
it
end of
seemed kind of
September, I think. End of September? Early October?
right at the beginning, October 2nd, I got
Sure.
there.
Sure.
So October 3rd was Broadway Flea. Um, and Kim, my friend who I was traveling with, we both kind of said it felt kind of empty in Times Square, and then Comic-Con came in and it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt really
Yes.
full.
And
But
I have
have
to
you
say,
noticed the difference?
yeah, so now I will say from October 3rd, which to me feels like 8 years ago, but was only 3 weeks ago, in the last 3 weeks, it has dialed back. It is tiled up a times a million. And now in the last week, I have really, really felt, oh, we're like very close to what it was before. We're still missing our international, we're still missing our student groups, but the week by week change has been
Mhm.
surprising to me. But it's as each show has opened, what I keep forgetting is it isn't just Phantom reopen on Friday for that one night. It's open 7 to 8 times a week, and it's doing a full schedule again. And so as each of these shows has been added, you've been folding it into the dough, and the dough keeps getting bigger because the shows are still in the mix of it all. It's not just they came back, they did a show, and then they closed. But the last 2 to 3 weeks, I've seen an unbelievable change with all the other big
Mm.
shows that have opened. And it's hard to think that week by week it could change, but it has. It is, and we're getting into the holidays, and so you're getting into that. I think people are now.
Yes.
We've been open a full month since the bigger shows have reopened on September 14th, and so people, one, their buying habits are much closer to the date. They're buying 2 to 4 weeks out, but so now the buying habits obviously have all changed, but in just a small span of a week, things are greatly changing, which is it's wild. It's wild to, like I say, it's wild to be kind of rooted in the middle of all that and watch it swirl around us. But week by week, we are
Mhm.
seeing um, this huge change from flea market week to today, to October 25th.
Absolutely. And I thought people would be, there are some people here. We have the Durham Performing Arts Center, which is our big touring house. That's where the big tours come. And I think people are still a little nervous, some
Mm-hmm.
people, about going back. When I was in New York, I didn't really get the sense that people were nervous. Some of the shows we went to were pretty full.
Yeah, and it's
It was
yeah,
pretty
it's
mhm,
I think they're doing everything in their power humanly possible to make it safe. And in some ways in New
mhm,
York City, the thing that a lot of people have been saying lately, which I think is very true. By no means am I an epidemiologist. I tap dance for a living. But what the common sense seems to be floating around is that they've been saying it's safer to sit in a room with 1,300 people in mass where everyone is vaccinated, in a building where everyone who works in the building is vaccinated, staring forward and laughing and maybe chuckling or crying, but it's behind a mask, is safer than going into a restaurant with 80 people unmasked eating and talking and yelling. And so it's hard. I think we've all went through 18 months of trauma of the thought of being in a group of 1,300 people, even if we're all sitting there just staring forward, it feels daunting. But for some reason, going into a restaurant without a mask, it feels, for some reason, that is to me a false equivalency. But in that there's less people, so it feels safer. But I think people are
mhm.
coming around to this idea that we all just kind of sit there and stare forward, and it feels very normal, except that we're all in masks. But otherwise, they've done everything humanly possible to make it a safe environment, from air filtration to testing multiple times to flow of traffic at intermission. They've thought it all through.
And the amazing thing is, with the exception of Aladdin, which had a little hiccup right after they opened, you're really
Yeah.
not hearing those because of COVID. They're really taking care of their folks. They're taking care of their performers. And I really felt as an audience member, they were taking care of the audience. So I felt safe.
Yeah, and it's the blessing and the curse of being one of the last industries to open, as it were. We have a lot of data to go off of. We have a lot of other major industries that did this. NBA sports, all the sports leagues. While a lot of them were outside, NBA was mostly or was all inside, and so they say that they brought in a lot of those thought leaders and scientists who led the testing in those fields to how do you do large scale testing of lots of people many times a week. And so they're using these saliva tests instead of nose swabs. There's lots of, and so it sounds, any theater that I've, stopped by to drop a gift off at or something or gone into, that you can really feel it. They're really, it's a safe environment. Everyone feels safe. Thank God, I don't think there's any other way to do it
Thank
than,
goodness. Yes.
everyone feels
I-
safe.
So were you grew up in Detroit? Were you a musical theater kid? You must have been a
Yes
musical
and
theater kid.
yes and no. I mean, now it's different because social media and the internet is a thing. Bootlegs, or these, what do they call it, slime tutorials, are a thing. But I didn't, in
Yeah.
Detroit, Michigan, you didn't, if a show came through and you had a family member who knew about it, maybe you went, they took you to see it. But for the most part, I didn't really know about musical theater until middle school, till 8th grade. And then, even then I only knew the shows that had CDs at our local library. So Footloose, Lion King, Jekyll and Hyde. And then I found someone gave me a copy of Rent, and that changed my life. But otherwise, you couldn't follow on social media. You couldn't, there was no way, I live near Detroit. You could see a show, but only if you had parents who were going to take you, grandma who would take you, and they only knew so many shows. And so yes and no. The kids that I meet now, God, I don't know. I would be, I think, in an entirely different place if I knew as much as they knew now at the age of 16. They know everything. They know who everyone is. They know how it all works. They know about belting. They know this is my mix. I was like, I don't know. I didn't know any of this. And so it's a blessing and a curse,
They're
I think.
kind of obsessed. They're a
Yeah.
little scary, the kids now.
Yeah.
with
I mean, there's
Broadway.
moments where I go, how do you know that? How do you, they posted on their Instagram story that, Max Clayton is doing this. And I thought, what a weird, wow. Okay, sure. So yes and no, as much as I could be without the internet or Instagram. But I marvel at the things these kids know, these kids, like I'm ancient. I marvel at the generations behind us, how they've embraced social media and how they're using it to the betterment or stronger awareness of what the business is and what changes need to be made. It's really incredible.
And the shows too. I think the
Yeah.
shows have tapped into this idea of fandom, and people have taken perhaps some notes from Spring Awakening, from Be More Chill, and even a Dear Evan Hansen, and the fans just have driven these shows so much. And the
Yeah.
shows, their marketing people are becoming very savvy about
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah. I think,
Very
I have a friend who runs a lot of the social medias of shows on Broadway, and I marvel at his life. I remember him years ago when he first started. I forget what one of his first shows, I think, was Allegiance. His name is Mike Carnes. He's incredible. He's a very talented man. And I think he started out as a stage manager and started doing social media. And I remember him saying, I have to hire someone to do just the likes and the follows and the engagement. And I thought, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, their whole job is engagement, is just likes and making sure that we are noticed. They notice that we're noticing them. And I thought, that's a whole person's job. He said, that's a whole person's job, and get fan engagement. And now at Broadway Up Close, I mean, we're so small and we're so nimble, but it's true. You have to engage. You have to make these connections with people. I think people only spend money or invest their time and energy into things that they feel a part of. They feel a community, especially in the theater world. And you have to create a community within a community. And it's a glorious thing when you do.
It is. It is. And your first show I read on the Broadway Up Close page was Rent. So did you see
Yeah.
it? You must have seen it in person because you put like your seat. You were very specific
You've
about that
ever met
being.
me, you know that generalizations are not a thing I deal in. Yeah, we were third row in the orchestra on the side. I'll never forget. We sat down. It was me, my mom, and my aunt. And if I'm honest, I hadn't really processed that we were going to see Rent at the age of 16 with my mom and my aunt. Once it got to contact and they're like under the sheet and basically everyone's having sex. Well, that was great. It was real uncomfortable, I guess, is the best way you can say that at 16. But I remember we sat down. Our
We
tickets, I think,
call that visceral in the theater criticism world. We just call it visceral.
very visceral.
Not uncomfortable, visceral.
Visceral, sure, with your mom. You're like, hi, mom. Oh God. So then we sat down. I think our tickets were like $100 and maybe $99, $119 or something, which felt, for the three of us, felt like so much money at the time. And I remember a cockroach at the Niederlander Theater. A cockroach walked over my shoe. And my mom, who's I love her to death. She's very Midwest. She's very like sweet and gentle and so nice. in her best New York jadedness, right away, she says, "Do you think that little cockroach paid as much as we did?" And I laughed, and I'll never forget it. I thought, wow, New York's really bringing the best out of her. Suddenly she was a comedian. And the little cockroach, I don't think he paid as much as we did, but I'm sure he loved it because it was Rent. And it changed my life. It really, live theater, specifically Rent, a show that felt so raw and real. And these people, I couldn't believe that this was their lives, that they got to do this for a living and they got to do it 8 times a week. And, I knew nothing about what the life of a performer was, but I knew that it looked really exciting and something shiny that I wanted to be a part of.
Absolutely. Something shiny, something fancy. It's pretty amazing. So what I love about your tours, when we were there, Kim, my colleague, and she's on our board of Beltline to Broadway. She's following along. She went on the Hamilton tour. And so many of your tours are rooted in theater history, in New York history. So, did your love of Broadway history, was that born out of constructing these tours, or did you always have love of theater history?
I always had a love of theater history, but other than the shows, I don't think I knew. That's even a lie. I definitely did not know a lot about the buildings themselves, about the theaters. I have a mildly photographic memory. So whenever I see a show, I could always look at a page of headshots and remember every single person and what they looked like. And I would read their bio.
Mhm.
And then if I saw another show, I go, oh, that was so-and-so, their pictures in front of that brick wall. And they did this show. And I saw that in Detroit. And wow, they went to this school. What a crazy career they've had, random ensemble person number 5 in the back. So I was always, it's probably an unhealthy obsession. I had this weird memory for people. And then once I had this idea to start a tour, I've always had a love of Broadway, a love of these buildings. But as I really started to dig into the histories of the theaters themselves, of the buildings, the 4 walls that have housed all these productions and all of these people that I became obsessed with, that there was so much magic that was in there that I didn't know. And every time I'd read a story that I really didn't know, the hairs would stand up on my arm and I'd say, I can't believe I didn't know this. This is crazy. There was a farm on the roof of that theater that I walked past a million times. And so some of these stories were so insane that I said, I have to do something with this. I have to tell people about it. Maybe they'll pay me money, but I think I'm probably just excited enough to tell them about it that I don't even know if we have to charge a lot. I don't know if this is a business other than an intense passion of mine to tell people these stories that I had dug up. And then it starts to, go, and then it becomes a business and you dig up more stories and you connect the dots more. Anytime you're building a story, you're looking for a photo, you're looking for some way to highlight that story. You're looking for a photo that you don't necessarily know exists. So I always say it's when I put together a tour, it's looking for a needle in a haystack, but you don't know if there's a needle in the haystack. Many times I don't even know if there's a haystack. So you're trying to construct this history with archives and this and that. And so then when I do discover an old book in an archive with photos that exist of a moment in time that I have imagined, and it's either exactly like I imagined or it's the antithesis of what I imagined, that is a magical moment and the foundation of what I've built the entire company on, those moments, those discoveries.
Well, and that is all it's all storytelling. It's just an extension of what you do in theater. It's storytelling. And except the stories are real and the buildings are real. And
Yeah.
some of these buildings have just extraordinary history. A lot of my friends and I will say there's nothing like going to a Broadway show. I would say there's nothing like going to a Broadway theater because so often the theaters themselves are just
Right.
monuments to this art form. It's just extraordinary.
Yeah, and you say that each theater has its history. It's each theater, I think, it has its story, has its own story to tell, and I think everyone is part of those stories. You've sat in the seats, you've sat in the red velvet seats, you've watched the shows. So most people aren't making a sense memory of the building connected to the show. You're making a connection to what you see under that proscenium arch, like everyone does. But when you zoom out the lens just a little further, and you looked past the proscenium and you look at the frescoes and you look at the boxes and you think at one point in time, someone's entire life was building this theater and putting money together to build this temple to art. I mean, we don't build a lot of theaters now, but even back then, I mean, it was an insane idea to build a theater. It's always been a risky investment. You hope someone will write Hamilton and it comes into your theater, but it's always been a risky investment from the start of it all. So I'm fascinated, especially as someone now who's building a business and owning a gift shop and figuring out what it's like to own a gift shop and to build these ideas and to connect the dots of a business. I'm unbelievably fascinated by the Schubert brothers and Oscar Hammerstein and David Belasco and Renee Harris and her husband Henry, that these people who said, I'm going to buy a plot of land and I want to be part of this. And my part of it is building a temple and then hoping I can fill the seats every night from the moment it opens. And I just think what a crazy part of our business that no one has really spent a lot of time digging up, because we talk about the stores and the actors.
It's very lettuce. I there's a play that I love that isn't produced very often, but it's Lettuce and Lovage. I feel like this is very Lettuce and Lovage of you with these buildings. So I kind of love this.
I think Lettuce and Lovage, doesn't she make it all up?
I think she did, but she was like, these ugly buildings, and she took people on tours in these ugly buildings
and would make up these stories and then make people fall in love.
These crazy stories.
So mine's like that, but like a little more fact.
Yeah. Fact based, not crazy. It is, theater is has suffered. Obviously, these buildings, these temples have been closed some of them are still closed for over 20 months, but a lot of them are protected. And I was reading a story, or I was watching and doing my research. The Marriott Marquis, for me, is a spot where you can find a clean bathroom. Yep. Used to be a spot where you could find a Starbucks, except on my last trip to New York, it was closed.
Correct.
And it's got a breezeway that you will probably walk through if you're going from one street to the next in the theater district. Correct. And I must have walked through that breezeway a million times. But what I didn't know is that that was the site of 5 theaters. And because the Marriott Marquis is now there, what came out of that is a protection for a lot of the theaters, which I'm sure after COVID and has affected so many of these buildings, that's a protection that, they're banking on. So talk to me about the Marriott Marquis, because it is either a monument or an eyesore, depending how you look at it, but it's in the middle of Times Square and you can't miss it. There's a theater inside.
It's there. It's definitely there. 1982. So the only theater that had been landmarked prior to the building of the Marriott Marquis, prior to this demolition, was the Lyceum, which is our 3rd oldest Broadway theater, was the only one landmarked. And when you look at the facade of it, you can see instantly why it's landmarked. It's beautiful. It's glorious. It's very fancy. Just down the block, they decide we're going to demolish these 5 Broadway theaters. At that point in time, 3 of them were still functioning Broadway theaters. 2 of them had been converted to movie theaters: the Astor, the Bijou, the Gaiety, the original Helen Hayes, and the Morosco. And these 5 theaters were sitting there, and they decide to boost the economy of struggling Times Square, crime-filled Times Square. We'll build this hotel. It'll bring people in. It'll help the economy. It'll create jobs. But we'll have to demolish these 5 unlandmarked buildings. So all the actors, they start a protest called Save the Theaters. And it was a group of many different people, between producers and writers and actors: Susan Sarandon, Richard Gere, Christopher Reeve, Celeste Holm, Joe Papp of the Public Theater. And they all sat on little stages that were erected kind of in a perimeter U shape around the 5. And they read lines out loud from the shows that had premiered originally in those buildings. So the original Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, the original Death of a Salesman, the original Long Day's Journey into Night. And they won. They won the battle. They got a stay of the wrecking balls. The wrecking balls were ready to swing. And the mayor said, "You're right. We should keep these. We should keep these." And everyone walked away and said, "We did it." And in the middle of the night, some backdoor money trading downtown, they removed the stay. The developers got their way. And horrified New Yorkers watched as wrecking balls went through the fronts of these 5 glorious unlandmarked buildings. The one ray of light is everything that was eligible became landmarked of our theaters. And that was because of a handful of people, one of which is a gentleman named Joe Rosenberg, who is a genius man of all of the knowledge in the world. I was doing virtual tours in the middle of the pandemic with Playville. And after the first one, I got an email that was the longest email. Still to this, I write a long email, but this was a long email, the longest I'd ever received. And it was from Joe Rosenberg. And he said, "I feel like I've met a kindred spirit. I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you just talked about for the last 55 minutes, but it was rapturous. And I feel like you're me, but I'm you, and I'm the guy who helped save every theater." And so he's the guy who helped write all the landmarks designations. He's the one who got the Titanic landing pad by Little Island preserved and saved and landmarked. And he was by no means the leading force of Radio City, but he was right there in the fray with the 2 leading forces, Bill and Rosie, who saved Radio City. And so these people came forward and said, "I can't believe you let this happen." And they kind of, I imagine them taking the mayor by the neck, but they really pressured the governing body that you really messed up here. And you almost did a really great deed by saving it, but you really messed up and you have to save the rest. And so then within that also, they put a theater inside the Marriott because they got tax breaks and zoning laws changed because they included a theater. That was a rule that had been started by Mayor Lindsay in 1972, which is why we got the Minskoff. It's why we got the Gershwin. It's why we got the Circle and the Square. Those 3 theaters came out of some love and help from the mayor's office. So the mayor, depending on who the mayor is, sometimes it's a great thing. Sometimes money talks, sometimes theater talks. But everything that's eligible to be landmarked, and eligibility main is that it has to be 30 years or older. So the Gershwin, the Minskoff, the Circle and Square are not landmarked because at the time when all the major landmarking was done, they weren't old enough. Now most of them are incorporated into skyscrapers. So there's no one of them houses Wicked, one of them houses Lion King. I think we're going to be fine. I don't think we're going to be losing the Gershwin.
They're not going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere.
And the Theater Hall of Fame. The Theater Hall of Fame is inside the Gershwin.
Yeah. So, I feel like it's all going to be preserved. And then the one thing that, a lot of people don't talk about, but, I love to talk about is the theater owners who have these buildings who are landmarked. You don't want a landmarked building because it means you have to go through all this red tape to fix anything in the building. You don't want to do that. You just want to fix your building the best you can and then move on with your life. So the Landmarks Commission, they said, we know you don't want at every vote, whether yay or nay, landmark or not, there was always dissenting votes from the Schuberts and the Nederlanders who said, no, we don't want it. And everyone else was like, no, we want it. Majority rules, you lose. But they said to these guys, all of them were men, they said, you own all this air above your theater that you can't use. We'll let you sell that to buildings going up next to your theaters in the long run. And you can sell the air you can't use. The building next to you can buy that air per square foot. They can add it to their development, build twice as high as the zoning laws allow. And years from now, you'll just be able to sell that air for millions of dollars. And so 3 weeks ago, above the Imperial Theater, where Ain't Too Proud just reopened, they just sold $51 million of air above the theater in a landmark deal that is moved. They're moving the air next door. I think of it one shovelful at a time. They're building a high rise next to the Imperial in that open vacant space that used to be a parking garage. And that one stipulation was during all this construction, Ain't Too Proud has a Wednesday and a Saturday matinee. You're not allowed to do construction for those 4 hours in the afternoons of Wednesdays and Saturdays. Otherwise, you'll disrupt Ain't Too Proud. And so there's all these little secret little handshake deals and little contractual things that I love. But it's New York City. It's the only way you can get things done is just know that years from now it'll pay off, but it's going to be a headache. But the world will love you because the buildings will be there in the meantime. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a reason that I talk about. Otherwise, I wouldn't have buildings to talk about if they were all torn down.
Well, and the Lyceum, I was there to see is this room, and it's a beautiful theater, so it is spooky season, or spooky week. And it's
Right.
funny, in the last year, we've had 2 guests who have brought up the fact that the Richard Rodgers Theater, where Hamilton now is haunted.
Okay.
Um, but one of your favorite theaters is the Belasco, which has this crazy haunted rich history too. So tell me a little bit of the haunted Broadway history.
Yeah, I
That
felt
I'll plug. You guys can go on the ghost tour when you go to New York and you can hear about all the haunted history.
sure, sure,
So
sure. Yeah, there's a
just
full hours worth, but right now I'll regale you with maybe 3 minutes worth. The Belasco is my absolute favorite. It's so much my favorite that I named my French Bulldog Belasco. He is currently chewing a bone next to me as I talk to you, as he does
oh,
on my
Belasco.
virtual. This is my life. He says, Dad's home from work. He ran home from the subway that was stalled, and I'm going to chew my bone until we get to go out. He loves me. So I named him Belasco because it's my favorite theater. The owner of the building, David Belasco, was a theater producer, entrepreneur, costume designer, playwright, composer, stage manager, wardrobe technician, lighting designer. I mean, he did everything. But why I talk about him, I think his personal life was more interesting. He was Jewish by birth. He didn't practice religion. He had a lot of friends who were Catholic. So he took it upon himself every single day of his life to dress like a Catholic priest. He was not a priest. He was Jewish, but he just liked the look of it. So every single day, the priest suit, the clerical collar, the priest robe, the clerical collar. He builds his theater. It opens as the Stuyvesant. 3 years later, he puts his name on it in 1910. And when he renames it for himself, he says, I love this theater so much, I want to live here. And he built his entire 10-room duplex apartment on the roof of the Belasco. When you look at the front of the building, you'll see there's 3 stained glass windows in the front. Of course, stained glass because he wants it to feel like a church, of course. And so in this apartment, he lives until 1931. He dies. 1932, they removed everything from when he lived there. And then in 1989, they sealed it. They put this big key in the door. They seal it. They said it's structurally unsound. No one should ever be in the apartment. And when I put my tour together and I learned this history of this apartment, and there it is, and you can see it, it's right there. I just thought someone has the key. I've just got to find them. I know that this needle is in the haystack. It's just an 8.8 million person haystack. So we get eavesdroppers on our tour. We had some guy eavesdropping, a construction worker. Coincidentally, I saw him about an hour and a half ago on the sidewalk again. But this man came onto our group and he was fascinated. He said, what is this? What are you talking about? What is all this? And I said, oh, it's a tour of the theater district. And he said, you always wear green? And I said, yeah, it's my favorite color. It's our uniform. It's our brand. And he said, but it's not just you, right? Girls do this too. And I said, what? What a weird question. Yeah, I have a whole team, male, female. Who are you? And he said, every day at 12:45, someone in green stands right here on 44th and they talk about this building. And I've seen you talking and I've always wondered what you could be talking about. And it's really fascinating. And I said, thank you so much. Where is your office? I'll have the group wave at you. And he said, no, I work in the Belasco. The last story you talked about a renovation. I did that. It's the biggest thing I've ever done in my life was renovate this apartment and this building. And you talk about it. And he said, you've made my day. I can't believe you tell my story. My name's Tom Stein. And I said, I'm Tim Dolan. It's so nice to meet you, Tom. Thank you for renovating. And he said, thank you for sharing my story. Here's my card if you ever have any questions. And I said, I have one question while you're here. I'm curious, who has the key to the apartment? And he laughed. And he said, I do. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, what are you doing next Friday at 5? And I met him at next Friday at 5. He pulled out the key and he took me into the Belasco apartment, which is known to be very haunted. And we went in and the parts of it look like a church. The whole thing's there. There's stained glass. There's a stained glass ceiling. He took me through all the rooms, his bedroom, his bathroom, and it's all still intact. You know, all the stuff removed, but still intact. And it was wild. It was creepy and spooky. I didn't see anything, but creepy and spooky and weird to be in a space that's right off of Times Square where 360,000 people are a day. But just down the block is this vacant kind of grand apartment on top of this Broadway theater. And it's haunted. They've seen the ghost of, they've seen a priest in the building. They used to see him on opening nights. They've seen a woman in the balcony who appears in a large blue dress. So our costume designers, who are just as crazy as us actors, if they get to design a show going into the Belasco, they costume one woman in a blue dress as a little wink to the ghost we sometimes see in the balcony. So I would say if you see a show at the Belasco, check out and look for the woman in blue who's hidden in the show usually. And so there's all these little secrets, but this apartment and the fact that I got to go inside, I just kind of fell in love with the building and these stories and the absurdity of David Belasco in his priest robes every day.
But not living at the theater, that's like my dream. Can you imagine living on top of a theater?
Yeah, I just think like it's there, use it, but they won't use it, And so they're like, we're not going to use it for anything. But I just think my office. Can I have my office up there? Wow.
Just
Yes, child. Can you imagine?
I love that. I love that. So is there a piece of Broadway history or Broadway lore that you've come to know, that you share with people on your tours that might surprise people?
Yeah, I will. When people ask, I've been asked this question before, and my mind always goes to one place, and I think it's a little embarrassing because it took me so long to like have this realization, but it wasn't really until 6 years into giving these tours and building these tours that I realized we don't talk about women a lot because the original
Mm.
builders of our industry were men, mostly white men, like most major industries in America. And as a white man, I think probably just like as a man, I just it never really occurred to me that women aren't there. They're on stage, sure, but there's no stories of women backstage or building the industry, and they must have been there. They had behind every great man is, I honestly I think behind, standing in front of but not seen is a great woman, as they say. But I just thought, wow, I think I have to be more intentional to find the stories because they're not just the stories that are out there. It's like the Schubert brothers, it's David Belasco, it's Oscar Hammerstein, it's the Theatrical
Mhm.
Syndicate, which was 6 men, it's Daniel Frohman building, and his wife, who was just kind of there. And so I had to be really intentional. But in 2019, I was afforded the opportunity to build a tour of the Hudson Theater. And I spent the entire year building this tour of one tour, hour 45 minutes of one theater. And I thought, are there enough stories here that you can do an entire tour of one building? The Belasco, maybe, the New Amsterdam, maybe, but the Hudson, I thought, I've really got to dig. And so I start digging. This is all the while I'm having these thoughts of I've got to find more female stories. The women are there somewhere. I've just got to find them, and I will find them. And the original owners were the Harrises, Henry Harris and Renee Harris, originally Renee Wallach. And they met in the summer of 1899. They fall instantly in love. They got married 2 months after they first met on October 22nd. Their anniversary was 3 days ago. Happy anniversary, Renee and Henry. And they get married, this whirlwind romance. He was one of these guys. He was one of these white guys who's building Broadway. And his wife was a secretary to a governor. And she left her job. She became a secretary to him. But what you start to dig and what you start to find out is he designs the exterior. She designed all the interiors. She picked the shows. She would decide which shows were going to be good, which would be flops, and she would navigate those. She'd give all the notes at rehearsal because she said a feminine touch is better to deliver notes to actors. She would plan the opening night parties. And you really look, and behind the scenes, this woman is like this fire engine, darting around this guy. And of course, in the headlines, it's Henry Harris. It's Henry Harris. But when you really start to dig, you're like, oh, it's Renee Harris. In April, they had made some bad decisions. I won't tell you the full story because we'll be here for hours, but they had made some bad financial decisions. They tried to build Broadway's first dinner theater. It didn't go great. The theater ended up lasting until 1982. It was one of the 5 theaters that was demolished in the Marriott Marquis disaster. But initially, they lost a lot of money on it. No one wanted to see a New York City dinner in a theater. In Iowa, it does great. New York City, not so great, but it takes a couple to find that out. And so they're losing all this money. They decide to go to London. They're going to pick up some shows. That's how they're going to make their money. April 10th, 1912, they get in Southampton, London. They were supposed to meet another couple, a couple named the Selwyns. They own what is now the American Airlines Theater, was originally the Selwyn. And they said, oh, we're all going back on the same ship together. We'll meet you on the docks and we'll all get on. So April 10th, 1912, the Harrises look up. There it is. There's the ship. They look around. There's no Selwyns. The Selwyns get delayed in Paris by one day. It ends up being the best day of their entire life because they missed the boarding of, as I'm sure you've all guessed, the Titanic. And so Henry and Renee get on first class without their friends. 4 days later, it's Sunday. It's April 14th. You know the story. Renee, just hours before the the iceberg. She slipped on her dress caught on her heel, and she fell down the entire grand staircase and shattered her entire right arm just hours before this disaster. And as it goes, she, it's real. It's all happening. Chaos ensues, and she grabs her husband by really one lapel because she only has one working arm. And she said, we're going down together, or we're getting off together, but we're doing it together, whatever happens. And he said, okay, sure. And so for 3 hours, they are looking for lifeboats because no one will let him on with her. And so she won't get in the lifeboat. And 3 hours later, they run into the captain, and Captain Edward Smith, he said, I love this pact that you have, but the men are not going to survive. The women are going to be the only ones who get off. Just get in a ship and save at least one of you. And she steps into lifeboat D, which ends up being the last lifeboat deployed 3 hours later. And by the time she stepped into the lifeboat and it was rowing away from the ship, the Titanic almost was completely submerged at that point because it had been hours. And as the lifeboat was rowed away, she and her, with her fur coat wrapped over her shoulders, she watched her husband on the deck of the ship go underwater. And just before his head went under, she yelled out, "Will we meet again?" And he said, "We will. Good night, my sweetheart," and went under. And so she lives. She survives. She's picked up by the Carpathia. The Carpathia is brought back to the dock that Joe Rosenberg, to connect the dots of tonight, that Joe Rosenberg landmarked and saved. And that portal at Pier 54 at 14th Street is still there, where the Carpathia pulls up with the Titanic survivors. And she inherits everything. And she becomes the first female theater owner in Broadway history. And the story, you come to find, you think, oh, what a tragic but beautiful story. All the men in the industry wouldn't listen to her. And they said, "You're just here because your husband died. So you can come to the meetings, but you're not, it doesn't really count." And I'm digging into this woman, and I said, this story is crazy. It's crazy. This is why there's no female stories. This is why, because the odds of any of them getting into any sort of record book or achieving anything, it was stacked against them. And she said, I went to all the meetings and they wouldn't pay attention. So finally I showed up to a meeting and I dressed like them. I wore a pantsuit. And she said, everyone stopped. And she said, that's what it took. It took a pair of pants for you to notice me. And she said, from the moment I wore a pair of pants, they gave me the respect. I was acknowledged as part of the club. And she said, I wore a pair of pants to every meeting for the rest of my life. And by 1929, she had done 8 shows with George M. Cohan. She built the theater. She owned 2 other theaters. She was killing it. And in 1929, the stock market crashed. She lost everything and it ruined her. And the story of this woman, I thought, I mean, I had to dig. I fell in love with the Harrises, specifically Renee. And so when you go to the Hudson Theater in the basement, what was originally the men's smoking lounge, there's a picture of Henry and Renee. It's called the Harris Room. They say sometimes the chandelier shakes, and they say it's reminiscent of the Titanic. And so they say the energy of Renee you can feel in the room when the chandelier shakes. And they said this to me as I was building the tour, and I said, "You really?" And they said, "It's right in front of the air conditioner vent, so that also could be why it shakes." And I said, "I hate you. This is how rumors start. This is how rumors that Hudson is haunted start." And so while we don't believe it's haunted, the chandelier does shake, but it also could be because the AC kicked on. And so I'm gifted the luxury of building a business that thankfully has done well. And I get to be very intentional with my stories. And I think what I've learned in the pandemic is when you have any sort of platform, whether it's 20 people on Facebook, whether it's thousands of people, when any platform you have, if you get a chance to tell a story, you have to be very thoughtful about the stories you tell. And so it's about 4 walls. It's about these buildings, but it's really, it's what stories are you going to tell? What stories do you dig? What are the stories off the beaten path? And how did we not know about Renee Harris? And so I strive whenever I get the chance to talk to her. I'm like, sure, the Titanic, you all know about that, but let's talk about Renee Harris. Yeah.
Amazing story. And the Hudson tour, if you're going to New York in 2022, that you're hoping to resume that tour.
Yeah, it'll definitely resume. We're waiting for the exact date. Plaza Suite, we're wrapped into their timeline of their reopening with Sarah Jessica Parker and Matthew Broderick, but it'll definitely reopen. February is what we're thinking. Tickets are on sale for January because I'm the most optimistic human, but there's a huge asterisk that says it also might not be January. So if you buy in January, just know I might call you and say, hi, let's go a different day, but we think February.
But if you're going to Broadway Con in February, then you can
I will be ready for you. Yes.
Tim will be ready. As a Broadway historian, can you think of any other events in the history of theater and the history of Broadway that has impacted the industry as much as COVID has?
So there's, nothing on this grand of a scale, this long. 1919, on the heels of the last pandemic, the Spanish flu, there was the actors strike for 1 month that summer. And that impacted and changed a lot of relationships. It set a lot of things in motion. It set up, it's what established an 8-show performance week. It's what established rehearsal pay. We weren't paid for rehearsals prior to then, or if we were, it was measly. And so a lot of the things that we still use today, 100 years later, all came out of that. And so that's the last time that something major affected an industry. And I think they said $2 million was lost. Relationships were severed that were never, it was kind of this big defining moment in a lot of partnerships. George M. Cohan had worked with Sam Harris for many years to great effect and great success. And Sam Harris was the producer and he sided with the actors, and George M. Cohan was the actor and he sided with the producers in this fight, in this strike. And they separated and never worked together again. Out of that, Sam Harris is looking for someone else creative. And so he finds a guy named Irving Berlin. And he says to Irving Berlin, if you write a show, I'll build you a theater. And so that's the Music Box Theater, is the theater he built for Irving Berlin with his Music Box reviews. And so again, I will always find the rays of light in these chaotic moments, but the last and the closest on no scale whatsoever to what we just went through, and they're still going through, the closest we have is the actor strike of 1919 for 1 month.
Okay. The road between Raleigh and New York is a pretty quick one. It's a quick trip. And I know that there are several people here, several theater lovers who are dying to go back for the holidays. There are some big openings, Company, Music Man, the Rockettes Christmas show, the Christmas Spectacular at Radio City. For someone planning a trip to the city in the near future, what would be your post-COVID travel advice, even if they've been there before?
Yeah, I think, there's lots of extra rules and there's lots of extra protocols. So I think anytime you're buying a ticket to anything, they're telling you all the rules. So I think just read the rules, read the emails they send you, because a lot of my gift shop staff also is the vaccine checkers. And they said they have this heartbreaking moments where a parent brings their child and didn't read the rules of the child who's 12 and under has to have a test within so many hours. And they said it's heartbreaking. And so I read the rules and do all of that. Wear your mask, get vaccinated. You can't go in unless you're vaccinated up until January 2nd, just at least. My gut instinct is it would probably be extended, but I don't know anything official. Read the rules. And I think there's certain shows that are already selling out. 6 tickets are $400 now for 6. Everything is insane at the Brooks Atkinson. So that took about 2 seconds to get back to insanity. Hamilton again, Wicked, Chicago. Some of these old stalwarts are back to their old games of being sold out and having to book in advance. Of course, The Music Man, I don't have to tell you, is doing very well and it hasn't even started. So all of those shows, book ahead and plan ahead. But right now, 2 to 4 weeks seems to be the buying patterns. And so I think if you're 4 weeks and a day, 4 weeks and a day ahead, you'll be ahead of the curve and the world is your oyster of whatever you want to see. And the city is ready. It is so open. We're waiting with open arms for you to get here. It's clean. It's safe. I had a woman come on my tour even just a month ago. And I said, it's your first time to New York City. What do you think? There's less guns than I thought. And I said, what? There's less guns. I just thought it was just going to be a lot of guns. And I was like, what? She's like, on the media, on the news, that they just say it's lots of guns. And I was like, I love you. It's not guns. There's not a lot of guns.
No guns.
There's
no guns.
Very safe. It's safe. And so the city's doing everything that's possible to roll out the red curtain. There's this magical energy that is happening right now that I wish everyone could be a part of in person. If not, follow me on Instagram and I channel as much as I can through my Insta story. But I think you got to be part of it. If you're a theater lover and you can get here, it's a moment. The things that are happening in these buildings, I think around America, I'm sure, but Broadway always seems to dial it up a couple $1 million more. It's just, it felt more like community. then we've all went through something traumatic and
Can you still hear me, Tim?
yeah. How about me? Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. You're breaking up. You were breaking up for a little bit. We're having some storms, some weather
Oh,
here.
crazy. Okay.
Um, you also sell merch. Okay, you guys, if you're going to New York, look for the TKTS booth, and then look next to it, and you'll see the Broadway sign. That I feel like everybody who's going to New York is taking pictures with your sign. We sure did when we were there. So you'll see the Broadway light up sign that you can pose with and take pictures with. You can book tours there at the kiosk. There's merch. But gifts for theater lovers. We keep hearing about supply chain issues. You actually make my favorite gift. I gave it to our mutual friend Andrea for her birthday, so now I can talk about it because I've given it to her. But it is a commemorative ticket. So if you have a ticket stub for a show, or you're like Aaron and you're opening a show, it doesn't have to be in New York.
Yep.
It can be anywhere in the world. You'll make these custom wooden tickets with your seat number, your date, the show you saw. So there's those gifts. But what are some good gifts for theater lovers, for those people who are starting their shopping super early?
Yeah, we last year. So I'm on a 10-year mission because I love a project. I'm on a 10-year mission to recreate all of the marquees into ornaments. So we do 4 every year. I thought no one would buy them, and last year we sold out in something like 20 minutes. And so I would say this year we're about to launch our next 4 in the next couple of weeks. They're all finished. I just have to market them and do all of the things. And then we do a set of ornaments that are of the year, so 3 of the moment and what's happening that year. And then we have a new series this year, which I won't tell you about because it's a surprise. But you'll see all of those. You know, if you have an avid theater go in your life, we have a thing called the Broadway Passport, which is my friend Adam, who's a set designer, sketched every Broadway theater. And when you go see a show, you stamp which show you saw at which theater. So you have a little passport of all the shows you've seen. Is another gift that for our avid theater goers, it's interactive and you start to pay attention to the buildings more. And then we just launched a thing called a scratch off marquee poster, which is, it looks like a lottery ticket as a poster. And then you scratch off all the theaters you've visited. And when you scratch them off, the marquees turn to color. And my big thing is the marquees. I've fallen in love with these marquees. And instead of a Mean Girls t-shirt or a Wicked t-shirt, which are glorious in their own right, we focus more on the theaters themselves. And so that's been our go-to. And so we hand make everything. We make it in Herald Square with me and my team, 10 blocks from Times Square. Supply chain issues for us, it's sourcing wood and acrylic. I have 2 great suppliers that there's no end in sight. I went to Lowe's today in Brooklyn. I drove a half hour to Lowe's to pick up all of our wood for our ornaments to roll those out. So yes, there's supply chain issues, but for us, because we hand make everything, we have less of those, thankfully. Yeah.
Yes. So shop local, shop
Yeah.
small, support small businesses, which is what I keep saying, but and visit BroadwayUpClose.com. Follow Tim on social media at Broadway Up Close on all the places, and book a tour with this amazing company if you're planning a trip to New York, but do it in advance, not like I did at the last minute, because you'll get booked. So
Yeah, so now we're back
so
to normal. So people are like, "Can I go tomorrow?" And I was like, "I love you so much. I can try. We can try, but also no." Yeah, it's
no.
crazy. It's crazy, but it's good. It's what we want.
And I think these tours just enrich the whole theater experience, because like for Kim, she had gone on the Hamilton tour, and the minute she got back, she's like, now I have to see Hamilton again, because all these places now I've put in context. So
Yeah.
thank you for hanging out with me. I don't want Velasco to suffer any longer. Please take that poor dog on a walk. Look at him. He's like, are you done yet?
He always knows. He can always tell. I've done so many virtual tours and things. He always knows when he's almost done. And so he just sits there and he starts looking and he's like, "You're almost done. I can hear it in your voice. It's a little higher." Oh, this dog is the smartest dog ever. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for hanging out with me. If you joined us late, you definitely want to replay this from the beginning to hear the extraordinary stories, or you can check it out on the website. Thank you, Tim. Stay safe. I will definitely
Definitely.
see you in February when I come for Broadway Con, maybe sooner.
Great.
But
Be there.
we will talk soon.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having us, and the support means the world. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you for joining us. Take that poor dog on a walk.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks everyone for watching.